applying for relief.
Your name?
Charles Gordon,
Your address?
13 Bruce Street.
Are you married or single?
Single.
Live with your father or mother?
No.
Who was your last employer?
Never had one.
Fill in this form.
They used to tell me I was building a dream, and so I followed them all. When there was earth to plow or guns to bear, I was always there, right there on the job. They used to tell me I was building a dream, with peace and glory ahead. Why should I be standing in line, just waiting for bread? Once I built a railroad, made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once I built a tower to the sun, brick and rivet and lime. Once I built a tower, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime?
Many of the working people of Canada, the Great Depression of the 1930s began well in advance of the historic stock market crash of 1929. For us, unemployment was already a fact of life. The crash of 1929 just made a bleak future look even bleaker. The Depression was a worldwide event. Few were left untouched. Jobs, homes were lost, farms and businesses were lost. Well over 1/4 of the country's workforce was unemployed, and per capita income fell by 50%.
And soup kitchens, flop houses, and hobo jungles sprang up all across the country, and freight trains loaded with unemployed going east passed freight trains loaded with unemployed going west.
Yes, it was freight trains. Long, cold, hungry rides on boxcars. Oil tankers and tenders and lumber cars, bumming the local butcher or baker at the back door for a meal.
Hey, buddy, bowl of soup for a day's work, eh?
Excuse me, sir. We're willing to work around the place. Anything you need done, if you can spare us some bread and let us sleep in the barn.
Excuse me, man. Us guys would be pleased to clean up your yard. Ma'am, I'd sure be glad for something to eat. My name is Yan Ho. I came to Canada from Guangdong province in China. I've lived here for 12 years, and one thing's for sure. Hunger and poverty don't give a hoot what color you are. We paid a $500 head tax to come to this country. We built their railroads. We hauled the ore out of their mines. Thousands of us died. From the youngest of us to old men who broke their backs all their lives. We suffer on a bowl of rice and a couple of rotten vegetables a day.
Perry's the name, and unemployment's no game. Seriously, I've been out of work since 29. I'll tell you, you never think of marriage, a home, or having a family. It's become a way of life tramping the country.
Every second man you talk to had spent time in jail, no money, no job, and no address meant vagrancy. And vagrancy meant jail. It seemed like there was a law to say you couldn't hang around and another to say you couldn't move.
And no story of the Depression anywhere in Canada would be complete without a description of the conservative Tory government of the day. It was a government that will never be remembered for its generosity. Richard Bedford Bennett was the Prime Minister. better known as Iron Heel. He was a multimillionaire who had earned half his fortune as a corporate lawyer and inherited the rest. He always ate 1 pound of the very finest chocolates every day. He was the very essence of a conservative, corporate capitalist, a sharp contrast to the ragged poor.
Canadians, by their heroic achievements upon the battlefields of France and Flanders, made for our dominion a place amongst the nations of the world. They are now engaged in a struggle for the agricultural and industrial development of their country, believing that if afforded an equal opportunity with their competitors, they can provide employment for Canadians in their own country, supply in large measure our domestic requirements, and command a fair share of the trade of the world.
He came to power in 1930 with promises to end unemployment or perish in the attempt, and to cure unemployment in 6 months. By 1931, 1 year after taking office, Bennett was forced to say, no one country can cure unemployment.
So much for the 6 months cure.
By 1932, Iron Heel had this to say, unemployment can only be cured through the grace of God.
So much for perishing in the attempt. Iron Heel Bennett said, the government is not here to subsidize idleness. The provincial Premier Patella had his own way of saying it. He simply said, root hog or die.
I don't want your millions, mister. I don't want your diamond ring. All I want is the right to live, mister. Give me back my job again. We work to build this country, mister, while you enjoyed your life of ease. You've stolen all that we built, mister. Now our children starve and freeze. I don't want your millions, mister. Give me back my job again. Give me back my job again.
Eventually, the government was forced to respond to a growing crisis. A mean, stingy, degrading sort of relief was set up for destitute families called gunny sack parades. You stood in line publicly for hours with your own gunny sack to receive just enough food, scientifically measured to keep you and your family alive for 1 week. But not for all the family. If you were 17 and older, you no longer qualified as a family dependent.
So you end up working as a domestic. My name is Nora. I made only $5 a month, was expected to work every day except for Thursday afternoon, and made to sleep in a room in the attic. The woman made me eat in the kitchen. She would stand in the doorway and talk to me and then say, I don't know why I'm talking to you, you're only the maid. But she let me look after her kids. And the master, he liked me too much. I got away from him every time, but finally I told the lady I was leaving town and had to quit. But I didn't tell her why. I don't know, I guess I felt sorry for her. So she screams at me for leaving without notice.
This is my house my father built. I was 7 years old and my mother and I were being evicted. and deportations grew. Whole families who had come to this country to start a new life and thought it was rich and bountiful were sent packing. 7,000 were deported in 1933, many for political reasons.
John here. You know it's bad all over. My sister's married to an Italian sailor. Nice guy. And they have 2 kids. So there's no work, and this guy goes down to the relief office because the kids are hungry and crying. My sister's at her wit's end. And the next thing you know, he's deported. So she goes to the relief, and they say that she can't get any relief because she's not white. And then they tell her that she can't get support under the Department of Indian Affairs because she married a white guy and lost her status. Oh, she's going out of her tree at this point.
Men who've been here for 30 years are given deportation notices. I knew Sing Chong Lu from the mining camps. He hung himself. They charged him with attempted suicide and refused relief to his family. I will not starve, and I will fight if they deport me.
About this time, the Single Unemployed Workers Association was formed. It was a beehive of activity every day and most of every night. All sorts of committees were selected. Committees to fight for relief, committees to fight for medical attention, committees to help fight evictions. Flying pickets from the Single Unemployed could carry furniture back into a house faster than the bailiff could carry it out.
Single unemployed, organized, and mobile seemed to be everywhere. Many had come to Vancouver because it was the only place where you could come and starve to death before you froze to death.
Have you seen the Anglican Mission Soup Kitchen over there on Kiefer Street? Rumor has it, they boil up an old shoe and serve it as soup. We should be eating fresh vegetables and meat for the amount of money they get from the government. But they act like we should thank them. What choice do we have? No pensions or relief camps just because we're Chinese. 叫政府俾嘢我哋食，叫政府俾工做，叫政府俾我哋啲家庭夠嘢食。As an individual, you won't get nowhere on your own.
But no matter where they came from or why they came, the single unemployed in Vancouver learned you can't get anywhere by begging. You had to get out and fight for it.
And fight we did. Ours was a comradeship that was built on shared hardship. No matter how often the press and the politicians pointed to the Red Menace, no matter how often they pointed to the direct link between our single unemployed organization and the Communist Party, we kept on. We asked questions.
We wanted to know why there were no jobs, why we had to leave home so the still younger ones could eat. What caused the Depression? Karl Marx described the Depression as the crisis of overproduction, but we changed that. We called it the crisis of underconsumption. We had nothing.
The whole situation was becoming a political bombshell, and demonstration after demonstration were brutally dispersed by mounted city and provincial police. Letters to the editor, thousands of calls to the mayor and aldermen. Church groups protested police brutality. Block and neighborhood councils were formed. Relief officers were swamped with delegations, each with their own set of complaints and demands. People were no longer suffering in silence, and everywhere the single unemployed were the most active.
Why don't I work like other men do? How the hell can I work when there's no work to do? Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. Well, I like the boss, he's a good friend of mine, and that's why I'm starving out on this bread line. Hallelujah, I'm a bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again.
And it was General A.G. McNaughton's 1932 scheme to form and bring relief camps under the Department of National Defense that ultimately framed the Tory government's policy to deal with the hundreds of thousands of single unemployed.
We were literally starved into Camp Circlehurst. When you got picked up for vagrancy, you could get a suspended sentence if you went to a relief camp.
Yeah, I have longshored and locked around Vancouver most of my life. So like any other unemployed stiff, I go to the Hastings Relief Office. And a guy that works there calls me names even I hadn't heard before, tells me to go back to the reservation, and sends me packing with a shove and nothing to eat, needless to say. So up to the camps I went. I met all kinds up there, old Union types from England, young Ukrainians and Finns who've been starved off the farms in Saskatchewan or around Nelson. All kinds.
When we got to camp, what did we get? We got a set of work clothes, army rations, a bar of soap, towels, and a bunk in a tar paper shack. These Spartan military conditions cost the government $1.17 per man per day, and that included our wages of 20 cents a day.
There was no electricity, no books, no newspapers, no magazines, no radios, no education, no compensation for injuries, no health care, no right to vote, no right to organize. What we didn't have could fill books.
And our relief camps, called slave camps by the boys, were from Vancouver Island to the Alberta border. They were isolated from the urban centers, and the work was basically meaningless.
I remember back then looking at the timber around us at Squamish, watching the phenomenal salmon run up the river, seeing the abundance in resources that was all around me. I can remember thinking then something was fundamentally wrong with this government and this society.
Well, some of us worked in the mines before the Depression. I'll tell you, a miner's not going to lay down and starve to death, not in any capitalist country today. I mean, one time near the beginning, we get into a camp and we see all these old wooden bunks and straw mattresses. But we set fire to them in the yard and go down to the foreman of the camp and say, look here, we need proper beds, proper dishes, and proper food. Beefsteaks and ham and eggs, because we're not staying here otherwise. You go and get it, and if you don't, well, don't bother coming back, because Sammy over here has a mind to put you on a raft on the North Thompson. So we go and stay across the ways on Indian land. They take us in. Anyhow, a train comes down from Edmonton the next morning, and they unload mattresses and pots and pans and saucers, the real ones. It's just as well, because all the cruddy tin ones had gone to their watery grave. What I mean is there was organizing from the beginning.
But it was the establishment of the Relief Camp Workers Union that transformed local protests and nightly discussions into a movement that changed the history of this country.
In many ways, the Relief Camp Workers Union was simply a continuation of the Single Unemployed Workers Association. It was still in the same hall and affiliated to the Workers' Unity League. The camp workers, it was an organizational light at the end of a very long and dark tunnel. Cards and stamps were printed. Dues were 5 cents a month. An 8-page mimeograph newspaper called the Relief Camp Worker was issued regularly. The paper was the greatest single organizational force the relief camp workers had. It was kind of an invisible contact amongst all the workers in all the camp.
In 32, the military get control of the relief camps. After that, we have to sneak in to organize, but we do. And if you're caught, it's the blacklist. You know, they stamp a big G on your card, and that's it. You stay in Vancouver and starve. G. It's a funny way to spell agitator.
When you went back to the relief camp office, you couldn't use your own card or your own name, so you made up another. Often, men had a dozen names. The Tellier brothers, Jerry and Louie, changed their names to Jerry Winters and Louie Summers. They said they'd already been through spring and fall.
They can't stop us. We strike those camps over bed bugs, because sick men can't get medical attention, because blacklisted men are kept out of camps in the dead of winter to freeze to death. The more we protest, the more men join us.
You could see guys sometimes, they didn't want to organize with anyone different, but they got over it. Up around Salmon Arm, I was sure proud it was 2 young kids from the reserve on horses that led the May Day parade that year.
By the spring of 1935, we were ready. Most of the camps in BC were organized, and we held a 2-day conference on March the 15th in Kamloops.
We set 7 demands to lay before the federal and provincial governments. Simple requests, really. The right to vote, the ending of the blacklist system, the right to organize, but we simply wanted work with wages.
We decided to call a general strike of the relief camps on the 4th of April, 1935. The men would stage a mass walkout from the camps to press for their demands.
We met Arthur Slim Evans, most of us for the first time. Arthur was sent to us by the Workers' Unity League. At 42 years of age, he was the stuff that working-class heroes were made of.
He was a journeyman carpenter and a member of the Carpenters' Union. He'd been a member of the IWW, the Wobblies. He'd been shot in the leg for his part in the Ludlow coal miners' strike in Colorado. He sometimes walked with a limp. But he'd worked with and learned tactics from 3 of the most militant trade union leaders of the time, Big Bill Haywood, Ginger Goodwin, and the immortal Joe Hill.
He'd organized the miners around Drumheller into the one big union. He'd been jailed in Prince Albert for, as he said, using funds to feed hungry people instead of sending it to a bunch of pot-bellied business agents in Indianapolis. He was tall and slim, a forceful speaker, and he had more guts than a slaughterhouse.
He was fresh out of jail for his union activity in and around Princeton. He was provincial organizer for the Workers' Unity League. He was a communist, and he was my dad.
When your luck's run down to 0 and you're hungry, cold, and broke, then you meet someone who helps you see who's got a plan you can believe, with the guts to stand and fight and lead, give you hope again.
I'm Slim Evans. When the Workers' Unity League asked me to help the single unemployed men, I was ready for it. I'd heard McNaughton on the radio. Projects have been directed to the breaking up of the congestion of the single homeless men in the principal centers of population. If these had not been dispersed, it is hardly conceivable that we would have escaped without having recourse to military force to suppress disorder. What he was saying was, there's going to be war in the streets. Well, they've got their war.
All the guys there being so much younger, Slim Evans kind of stands out as their dad. And they think, oh, we got a good father here in Vancouver. He'll show us how to go about it.
Slim Evans was big on discipline, and I always agreed with him. He politely told us at the time,
you guys are not going to get nowhere, get no food, nothing, unless you learn to live together, move together, unite yourselves. If you're together, then you can get the married people in the cities behind you.
He told those boys, no fighting, no stealing. He said never to wreck the buildings that other workers had made with their hard sweat and labor.
Arthur assigned each of us to 3 divisions. Each division was about 500 strong. Each had separate headquarters. We held meetings every day. We voted on everything. It was the most democratic organization that I've ever belonged to.
And on April the 7th, strike leaders sat down with representatives of more than 40 organizations, and thus was formed the Action Committee, which mobilized so much support for the strikers. Within a week, the Action Committee organized a tag day, even though the city refused to permit, and the collection topped $5,500.
My name is Sarah. I am a member of the Mothers' Council and the CCF Women's Section. We women have been organizing for 5 years to fight evictions and hunger. Those are our boys. our sons, nephews, and brothers. They've come down from the camps without a cent, hundreds of them. One even dropped dead of hunger right on the street. We hold a conference at Hotel Vancouver. There are 72 women's groups there. We organize a petition with 35,000 names on it, but to no avail. So I say, enough commissions, delegations, and petitions. Now we'll take over and act. We distribute 500 tags asking, our boys, are they criminals?
We, the mothers of today, demand the abolition of the relief camps. Support our boys. Buy a tag.
Support the Relief Camp Workers Union. Buy a tag. The public hears our plea. They support us. Many of them come to the Cooperative Commonwealth Parade and rally. 2,000 of us women lead the march. When we enter the rally, such a cheer goes up for our boys.
When there's 20,000 people behind you, it's not just your movement anymore. We speak for everyone who suffers.
As we held an impromptu rally, we couldn't help but notice that while we were listening to speeches, the square had been completely surrounded by 3 different kinds of police: the city, provincial, and the RCMP.
A delegation of 12 dispatched to City Hall to interview Mayor Jerry McGeer. But instead of 12 returning, only Matt Shaw came back to announce to an outraged audience that the delegation had been arrested for vagrancy. Another delegation was sent, this time made up of citizens of Vancouver who could not be arrested for vagrancy. While they were away, McGeer himself arrived at Victory Square. At the cenotaph, McGeer's opening comment was, "Okay, boys, you asked for it." He then proceeded to read the Riot Act, ordering the crowd of about 5,000 to disperse on pain of life imprisonment.
After McGeer reads the Riot Act, and we all boo and hiss and such, a fella stands up and says, "Let the women in the crowd decide what we should all do. Should we move off and meet to plan our next action, or should we stay here and let the police attack us and take the consequences?" So the women vote, and of course, they all vote to retreat in an orderly fashion. But Scanlon, that animal on horseback, as he's rearing up to attack us. A delegation goes and negotiates with Police Chief Foster, who's standing right there. Foster calls off Scanlon, who's so eager to start the clubbing he almost hits Foster till he remembers the guy's his boss. And back we go. We almost had a Regina riot in Vancouver. This is when McGeer gets an iron door put on his office.
The day after the incident, several thousand copies of a cartoon depicting McGeer reading the Riot Act were sold in the streets to raise money, and they went like hotcakes. May Day that year, the workers' holiday, was truly a colossal event. The labor movement and sympathetic citizens showed up in force. Thousands of students left school. 20,000 and more marched into Stanley Park.
What is the Chinese Protective Association? We're part of the Workers' Unity League. We want inclusion in direct relief like every other race. We will march side by side with Indian, white, and Japanese workers on May Day this year.
On Mother's Day, we lead 1,500 relief camp workers to a picnic in Stanley Park. In Malkin Bowl, we form the outline of a giant hat. The relief camp boys then march inside our protective embrace. Oh, that we could keep them there, safely in their mother's arms, away from the hardships of this world. On Sunday, we host the boys at our homes for dinner. There are so many mothers willing to feed a hungry boy that we run out of strikers. Many of us give them a warm place to sleep and a bath. So it's sad to let them go again, but most of us can barely feed our own families. We hold a citywide straw vote. The ballot reads, "Do you wish to abolish the relief camps? And are you in favor of giving immediate relief to the strikers?" The vote? 26,972 for abolition. 513 opposed. Even the mayor is impressed. He immediately wires the federal government. "I urge you to reconsider a plan under which men can be put to work for reasonable wages."
The answers from Ottawa and R.B. Bennett were always the same. Full of officious language, they arrogantly refused to recognize the existence of the relief camp workers or to help in any way, shape, or form.
Almost every day, the divisions would march through the downtown streets, in and out of stores chanting, "When do we eat? When do we eat?" or their slogan of work and wages. Our funds were almost exhausted. Our slogan, "Condemned to starve, compelled to act."
My name is Marion, and I work at the Trocadero. It's on Hastings down in the Tenderloin, where the loggers and the miners and then the relief camp boys come into town. They come into the restaurant, and I give them a bowl of hot water and a cup of coffee. They dump an entire bottle of ketchup into the water to make tomato soup. Smart. And I don't mind. After all, I'm working a 60-hour week, split shifts for starvation wages. About 6 months ago, a line of over 100 men come marching down the street. They divide into groups of 8, one of which comes into our restaurant. The boys sit down and they order a big meal. I serve them, wondering all the while, how are they going to pay? When they finish, they come up to the counter and ask for the manager and tell him they have no money, that he could call the police if he so desires. Well, he does. And the boys sit there, quiet and polite till the cops come. We girls are slamming the dishes around. We are so angry at our boss. We knew he could well afford to feed them on the house. Gee, some of them were guys who used to come in there regular when times were flush. We heard later that they were given 48 hours to leave town, or 90 days in Ocala. A lot of them chose Ocala. I guess they wanted to fill those jails, show the public how the government is spending their tax dollars.
There's no juice in the barley, no salt in the sea, no ginger in life or the future I see. And living ain't quite what it's cracked up to be when you're out of a job. You watch with care each mouth that you feed. They're young and they're ready to sow the wild seed. When you ask, can I give them the things that they'll need, then you know that you're out of a job. There's no juice in the barley, no salt in the sea, no ginger in life or the future I see. And living ain't quite what it's cracked up to be when you're out of a job.
Arthur Evans always insisted, you've got to do something new, surprising, something with daring. Be militant. At our morning meeting, Rodney Liversedge from the Strategy Committee proposed that we suspend our normal agenda. The vote was in favor. He then proposed that the divisions do whatever assigned to them to do. The vote was again unanimous. The air was electric. We all knew that something was about to happen.
The plan was for Division 1 to march to Spencer's store, now the Sears Center. Give the impression that we were going to enter the store, to keep marching around the store chanting, when do we eat? When do we eat? drawing as much attention as possible. 10 minutes later, Division 2 was to march around the Woodward store and commence a similar diversion.
Meanwhile, back at Division 3, my division, events were being watched very closely. As soon as we got word that the police had been successfully diverted, we marched quick time to the museum, now the Carnegie Center on Main and Hastings, entered the building, instructed the staff to leave, and barricaded ourselves in. The other two divisions joined forces and commenced to stake parade up Hastings towards us. Public support was phenomenal. They stood guard along with Divisions 1 and 2, shouting their support and sending up food and tobacco with wicker baskets to the third floor.
You could bet the wires were really humming that day. Telephones was ringing all over town. But the busiest one was the mayor's office. What could he do? By the time our delegation reached him, he was ready to concede 2 days relief and safe conduct from the museum. It was a victory, no doubt about it. We'd finally forced old Jeremiah Jesus McGeer to cough up some relief. What's more, everything had worked out just as planned, not a hitch. We left the museum without a trace of damage, and the crowd cheered as we marched, singing, "Hold the Fort."
Now appearing, victory is nigh. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union hearts be strong. Side by side we'll battle onward. Victory will come.
But we didn't have long to celebrate. 2 days later, our relief ran out again. A lot of the boys were getting tired. We'd been marching, tin canning, protesting, and fighting for over a month and a half, and still Ottawa was silent.
And the business community formed the Citizens League and started an unprecedented red-baiting campaign. They bought newspaper ads and radio time, condemning the entire Relief Camp Workers Union as a communist conspiracy.
Au printemps 1919, Lénine convoque ses agents à Moscou pour le premier congrès mondial de la Troisième Internationale. Le but de cette redoutable organisation, unir les ouvriers de race blanche, jaune et noire du monde entier pour abattre tous les gouvernements civilisés et leur substituer la République des Soviets. Le modèle de la révolution mondiale, c'est la révolution russe. De tous les pays du monde, les agents communistes sont venus pour faire rapport sur leur activité et recevoir de nouvelles instructions.
There was no conspiracy. We all knew who was a communist and who wasn't. If fighting for such simple things was considered revolutionary, more the shame on our society. You can always tell a good idea if an idea is really good. Everybody believes they thought of it first. Well, that's what happened with the idea that we take the strike to Ottawa, the On-to-Ottawa Trek. The plan seemed inevitable and unanimous all at once.
There were lots of reasons why we saw it as a good idea. We'd all been told by every level of government available, civic and provincial, that ours was a federal problem, a nationwide problem. They passed the buck. Only Ottawa could help. If Ottawa wouldn't talk to us, hey, we'd go and talk to Ottawa. After all, we were all experienced boxcar riders by this time. The idea caught on like wildfire. There wasn't a man who thought we couldn't do it. We made the decision official at a meeting on May the 30th, held a tag day on June the 1st, and left on June the 3rd, 1935.
And there weren't any brass bands. They marched in divisions, very calm and very disciplined. And aside from a few stool pigeons, they were the cream of the crop. And hundreds of well-wishers were there with parcels of food and words of encouragement. Then, in the old CPR freight yards at the foot of Gore, the words rang out, Division 1, board the train.
Division 2, board the train. Division 3, board the train.
And the train slowly began to pick up speed, and our boys were off to Ottawa.
Our first stop in Kamloops the next morning was hard. There hadn't been much time for our advance party to plan for our arrival. But by the time we bedded down under the stars that night, our bellies were full and our spirits were high. In Golden, the next stop, there were bubbling pots of stew as big as bathtubs, waiting for us with a hospitality that we shall never forget.
By the time we got to Calgary, our number had grown to 1,600, and more were on the way. Medicine Hat, Swift Current, Moose Jaw. Each stop brought more public support. Every time we boarded the train headed east, our strength and confidence had grown. Our entry into Regina, my hometown, June the 14th, was something of a triumph. As we marched through the city streets, throngs of people lined the sidewalks to show their support. There was an official welcome prepared for us with speeches, congratulations, and a choir saying. The Saskatchewan Premier Gardiner, a Liberal, had even agreed to provide us with 3 days relief before we had a chance to demonstrate.
The Regina Citizens Emergency Committee, a support group of 20 organizations, had been formed on our behalf. 500 men from the Dundurn Relief Camp joined our ranks. We knew that upwards of 5,000 single unemployed were waiting to join us in Winnipeg. Ottawa finally got the message. They could no longer ignore what was becoming an epidemic of discontent.
2 cabinet ministers, Mannion and Weir, arrived in Regina on June the 17th, and they wanted to deal. They proposed that a delegation of 8 proceed to Ottawa to negotiate with the government while the rest of the trekkers stayed in Regina, all at government expense.
In modern-day language, it was an offer we couldn't refuse. After all, the whole reason for the trek had been to negotiate with the government.
We recommend that the main body of strikers stay in Regina, while the same delegates that had met with Mr. Mannion and Mr. Weir go off to Ottawa. I present the proposition. Regardless of whether or not we believe this to be a trap, we must accept the proposals. We've been fighting for this for 2.5 months. If we refuse, we'll be discredited.
If we go, they'll arrest us.
We have no choice. We've demanded a hearing in Ottawa. If we don't go, we'll lose the public support.
It's a trap!
We have no choice. The vote to stay in Regina and send us to Ottawa carries without one dissenting vote.
Have you heard? The leaders of the relief camp workers are on their way to Ottawa.
So off we go. There are 8 of us. Myself, Tony Martin, Pete Nielsen, Red Walsh, Jack Cosgrove, Paddy O'Neill, Mike McCauley, and Doc Savage. First class, upholstered seats and dining car service straight to hell to meet the Prime Minister of Canada, R.B. Bennett, June the 22nd, 1935. If you can call it a meeting. While Bennett sits, we're not even offered a chair. For half an hour, we stand. He abuses us and forces us to listen to a blustering anti-communist tirade. We're interrogated like schoolboys. It's as if our list of negotiable demands don't even exist and are simply out of the question. We want to talk about work, wages, medical attention, the right to vote, unemployment insurance. All Bennett wants to do is listen to the sound of his own voice. He accuses me of being an embezzler. I call him a liar. He accuses the men of not showing much interest in finding work. I explode and say anyone who uses such despicable tactics is not fit to be the Prime Minister of Canada. That ends the discussion.
I'm as mild-mannered man as can be, and I've never done no harm that I can see. Still on me they put the ban, and they throw me in the can. They go wild, simply wild over me. They accuse me of rascality, but I can't see why they always pick on me. I'm as gentle as a lamb, but they take me for a ram. They go wild, simply wild over me. Oh, the jailer went wild over me, and he locked me up and threw away the key. Well, it seems to be a rage, 'cause they threw me in a cage. They go wild, simply wild over me. Will the roses grow wild over me when I'm gone into that land that is to be? When my soul and body part in the stillness of my heart, will the roses grow wild over me?
By the time the delegation had returned to Regina, the two railroads, pressured by the government, tightened security and made it impossible to ride the freights. The attempt to move by truck, car, bus, or even on foot would fall under vacancy sections of the criminal code. The Regina newspaper stated, prosecution faces any person who assists the relief strikers any way. Relief was cut off.
Colonel Wood of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had 500 constables at his command and was taking his orders directly for Ottawa, much to Premier Gardner's outrage. The trap was set, we couldn't go, and we couldn't stay.
The trap sprung. It was Dominion Day, July the 1st, 1935. An evening meeting was called to hear a report from our returned delegates. About 3,000 townspeople attended. Most of the trekkers, having already heard the report, were off at a local baseball game.
Large moving vans, innocently parked around the square, burst open at the shrill of a whistle. Out poured the Mounties, each armed with clubs as big as baseball bats. At the same time, the city police came charging out of their station. They waded into the crowd like wild men, clubbing defenseless citizens to the ground as they went. The leaders of the trek were arrested, the police riot was on, and the On-to-Ottawa Trek was off. The battle lasted until 2 o'clock in the morning. Hundreds were seriously wounded. Some were crippled for life. If the police had wanted to, they could have arrested the Trek leaders that afternoon at 5 p.m. in Premier Gardner's office. The whole idea had been to destroy our organization.
We were pinched under that infamous Section 98 of the Criminal Code, where the government can declare any organization illegal. So they nailed the Relief Camp Workers Union and took away all our rights. Then they scared the bejesus out of anyone who might help us. If you're even caught with a leaflet about the strike, you're a Red and you could be tried for treason. Plenty of guys rotted in jail under Section 98.
The following day, Premier Gardner regained his rightful constitutional control over the RCMP. The machine guns trained on the gates of the stadium where we were billeted were removed. Relief and train fare back home was provided. And the charges against the leaders were dropped because of lack of evidence.
The arrogant and brutal policies of the Bennett government lay completely exposed. He was defeated in the next election and disappeared from public life. The relief camps were later abolished. Many years have passed since we marched through the streets of Vancouver singing Hold the Fort. Times changed, and we changed with them. When war came in 1939, there were jobs for everyone, and we all became heroes.
Overnight, there was money for everything. Money for bombs, guns, planes, and battleships. For 10 long, weary years, investment capital had been frozen in the hands of the very wealthy, waiting for a chance to make a huge profit. And war brought that chance. Fortunes were made as lives were lost. Some of them are trekkers.
For the next 40 years, we all rode the economy the way we used to ride the freights in the dirty 30s. Up and down, over the straight, hot-flowing prairies when times were good, holding on for dear life through the cold mountain passes when times were hard, never knowing what the next bend would bring or when the next boom or bust would end.
Unemployment insurance and health insurance were finally won. Welfare for the needy. Even unions grew with the good times.
Gradually, like a train picking up speed, things begin to change. Suddenly, I'm an angry young man again.
Here.
Massive unemployment is everywhere, and the unthinkable war is here. Food banks, evictions, bankruptcies, farm foreclosures are growing everywhere, and everywhere our youth is hit the hardest. For millions of unemployed Canadians, our slogan of work and wages is still as valid today as it was then. I want to say to the young people of Canada, there's no shame in being unemployed. It is not your fault. But if you don't fight back and organize, that would be a bloody shame.
We meet today in freedom's cause and raise our voices high. We'll join our hands in union strong to battle to die. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union hearts be strong. Side by side we'll battle onward. Victory will come. See our numbers still increasing. Hear the bugle blow. By our number we will triumph over every foe. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union hearts be strong. Side by side we'll battle onward. Victory will come. Fierce and long the battle rages, yet we will not fear. Help will come whene'er 'tis needed. Cheer, my comrades, cheer. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union hearts be strong. Side by side we'll battle onward. Victory will come. Every shade of human color in our ranks is found. Men and women stand together, sharing common ground. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union hearts be strong. Side by side we'll battle onward. Victory will come. Scorn to take the crumbs they drop us. All is ours by right. Onward march, all hell can't stop us. Crush the past.